Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen, to What If Deku had the Venom symbiote. Now, I'm not even gonna sit here and talk too much because this video is so damn fire that an intro would just ruin it. So all I'm gonna say is if you like it as much as I enjoyed making it, please do me a favor and leave a hype, a like on the video, subscribe to the page, because it would just be heartbreaking if this video does not reach a massive audience. It really brings back the spirit of what ifs we're all made to do. And I just know you guys are gonna love this one. So with that said, enjoy. How will everything start? I'd like to think that everything would kickstart with Izuku actually training with All Might, right? Like, you guys remember how Izuku was going to be the successor of All Might and all that crazy stuff? We're going to be keeping all that the same. Deku is consistently going to be training alongside All Might at Dagoma Beach, and while Deku would be training one of those days, out of nowhere a freaking meteor from the sky would come crashing down on the pile of garbage that Deku would have amalgamated together, right? So as Deku would look, he goes over to check it out. Izuku sees this rock, and as he gets closer, he would think, All Might, just looking around only to see that All Might was, at the bathroom. Obviously, he heard the noise of that explosion and everything, but what is he gonna do when you're in the bathroom? You can't, you know what I'm saying? You can't get up without wiping. So my boy All Might's over there, viciously trying to clean himself off, all the while Deku, would be examining this small meteor rock thing. And as Izuku would get closer, suddenly he would see this black sludge gooey-like thing just crawl up his arm. Izuku crying out, "What is that? Get off!" As it would completely cover his entire arm, and before Izuku knew it, his entire eyes were covered, his mouth was covered, ears, everything. To the point where Deku thought that he was having Sludge Villain Part 2, but after about 3 seconds, Izuku opened his eyes, and the next time that he closed his fist, Izuku felt strength the like that he had never felt before. Now, I know that the Venom symbiote typically doesn't actually just, go with any random person and just instantly starts working, right? We know from the Venom movie that if you're not a proper host, you'll straight up die. But let's just go into the assumption that Deku is the right host. Let's give him that chosen one type of backstory. As Izuku would kind of just sit there, and All Might comes out to see that Deku was wearing this strange, fully black suit on himself. All Might staring at him and being like, "Young Midori, what is that? Do you have a quirk?" As Izuku would say, "All Might, it's not a quirk, I promise. This meteor landed here." And All Might's like, "Yes, I heard that noise. Are you okay?" Izuku being like, "I don't know. I went to reach towards it to check it out, and next thing I knew, this thing covered me. I think it's some sort of alien or symbiote," with All Might telling him that he'll help him get him off. But the moment that All Might would go to reach for Deku, Izuku's hand would ball up, and it would punch All Might directly in the stomach. All Might actually feeling the blow because he would have targeted All Might's weak spot, him being sent back a few inches, as All Might would look up and be shocked. "Izuku, this power, it's unnatural." All the while, that symbiote thing would stretch out from Izuku's right shoulder and be like, "Stay back." Izuku looking at that thing and just being like, "What are you?" As it would say, "My name is Venom." And yeah, I'm sorry, I gotta do the voice. I know it's gonna be kind of cringy for you guys, but bro, that's the whole fun part of this video. So excuse me if, it's annoying and it weirds you out, but I'm gonna do the freaking voice. "My name is Venom. I am a symbiote from a distant planet. I mean you no harm." Izuku looking at that thing and just being like, "Ugh," just passing out. All the while All Might would pick up try to pick up the unconscious, Deku, only for the symbiote to continue talking and say that it's on the run from a villain that likes this world, or not this world, but he's on the run from a villain that was trying to, no, not a villain. He's on the run from the world because it was an apocalypse. There was a civil war of symbiotes from the place that he's from, and he got lucky enough to find a host like Deku, being on "I promise I'm not a villain." As All Might would hear that voice, and he's just he's not so freaking sure. But All Might is sure of one thing. He needs to rip that thing off. So he would try tearing at it, but the symbiote is just refusing, telling him, "If you rip me off of this host, I will have less than 24 hours before I die." All Might hearing that and feeling bad, as he would take a few steps back and the symbiote would tell him,
I've read the boy's memories, and I know how this world works. If he desires to be a hero, then I can help him. The symbiotes have abilities that are very similar to quirks. Let me show you.
As he stands the body up and then proceeds to aim like a hand towards him and shoot out like a black tendril, not similarly to what Spider-Man does, but like more like Venom, you know, before knowing Spider-Man. It completely wrapping around All Might as All Might would try to like take that stuff off, and suddenly Venom would retract it. All Might staring at him as he would then go on to leap up into the air, showcasing that not only does he have that strange sludge like goo that was wrapped around him, but he also has incredible strength in terms of jumping. And not to mention it's giving him super strength, because now picking up a fridge is the easiest thing in the world. So as All Might would stare at, you know, this Venom like symbiote, he would then tell him to wake up the kid, as Venom would say,
I can do that.
Waking up Izuku instantly, as he's like, All Might, what happened? Did you get the thing off me? With All Might telling him that he didn't, and that he has a new quirk. Looking at Deku as Izuku would, you know, like stare at All Might and be like, what do you mean? And Venom would like stick his head out, like looking all creepy. Izuku about to pass out, as Venom would scream,
Don't pass out. I promise I mean you no harm.
All Might like staring and wondering like what the heck will come out of this, as Venom would go on to explain that he's on the run from his planet called let's just call it Apocalypse, because why the heck not? I don't feel like looking up what the actual Venom symbiote planet is called. And so with that being the case, after Izuku would hear the story of Venom, how his planet's on the run and how he like is quite literally the only thing keeping Venom alive, that he's surprised the first host he found was capable of hosting him, Izuku would go on to decide that it's the heroic thing to keep Venom, deciding that he's not going to be relying on his powers because he feels like that's going to be wrong, as he would tell Venom to just stay with him, I guess. Venom going on to tell him that he will do that and thanking him for that, as Izuku would nod and his training with All Might would resume. You know, Izuku asking if like the black sludge can like disappear from him, and Venom would go on to transform Izuku back into his normal clothes. Izuku thinking that that's like really freaking cool, although All Might would stare at Deku and just wonder like if this changes anything. I mean, technically now Deku has a quirk. He could become a hero now, right? But Izuku is not even like intent on using this power at all. So at the moment, he just straight up continues his training alongside All Might, not taking any of the help from Venom that he normally would, as Venom would do his best not to kind of like, I guess you could say, amp up Izuku's natural stats, if that's even a freaking possibility. So Deku, by the end of the 10 months training, which would have been like another 3 months, we would then end up seeing Deku standing on the pile of garbage just crying out like, I did it! As All Might would arrive with a smile on his face, yank out a piece of hair and tell Izuku, eat this. At this, Izuku would be like, what? Asking if he's joking, as All Might would go on to explain that in order to get the quirk, he has to ingest some of his DNA. So Deku does that, and right after this would take place, Izuku would start, asking why he doesn't feel different, saying that when the symbiote came on him, he felt different, but now it's nothing. As All Might would go on to explain to him that it takes a while for the quirk to kick in. His system has to digest it, telling him good luck on the exam and to do his best, with Izuku smiling and saying that he will. It's at this point that Izuku would hear the voice of Venom telling him,
Congratulations, I knew you had it in you, and you did it with a little bit of my help too.
Izuku would be like, what? I told you not to help. As the symbiote would say,
I couldn't help it, you were so weak.
Izuku, kind of like rolling his eyes as he would make his way towards the quirk, the quirk apprehension exam, or sorry, no, the US, not the USG exam, the UA entrance exam. That's the word I'm looking for. He makes his way to the UA entrance exam, and once there, Izuku, would just look up at these gigantic gates. He's just like daydreaming about how cool it's gonna be to be part of All Might's alma mater. I don't know, man. You guys know the word I'm trying to go for. Right? As Izuku would make his way there, and suddenly he starts to trip. But before that could happen, one of Venom's tendrils would actually latch onto the ground, preventing Deku from falling, as Deku would be like, I'll just die, realizing that he didn't fall, and looking at Venom as he's like, did you help me? And Venom is all like,
yeah, you were very clumsy. Concentrate, hero. At this pace, you won't be a successor to All Might.
Izuku, hearing those words and realizing he's right, he has to lock in. So, making his way inside of the entrance exam area, Izuku goes on to pass that thing, having the same little interaction that he does with Ida, all the while Venom internally would just be like,
"That guy's a jerk. Can I eat him?"
With Izuku be like, "No, you can't freaking eat people. We've been over this." Venom just getting mad at that because, he hasn't been able to eat people. Obviously, he wants to, but he hasn't been able to because Deku's a freaking hero. And he's like, "You won't be staying with me if you try to eat anybody. I don't care. Villain, hero, vigilante. It's not up for discussion." So Venom has to just deal with the fact that Izuku's going to be having this stuff happen to him. And we're going to be, you know what I just low-key thought of? Like, I don't mean to spoil the story, but I just low-key thought of a funny thing for the end. Should we give All for One the freaking Venom symbiote? I feel like that'd be really fire. Now, originally I was gonna record this as a movie, but bro, I just gotta know. Do you guys want All for One to have a Venom symbiote himself and have kind of like a Venom versus like Carnage type symbiote fight like at the end of the story? Let me know about that one because I will for sure do it if you guys like it. But if you guys end up saying no, then I mean, what the heck am I gonna do? Anyways, okay. Jumping back into the story, we now jump cut to Deku making his way towards the outside portion of an exam, and once there, Izuku would see this gigantic gate with two massive doors, him looking around at everybody there as he would hope that the quirk could kick in sometime soon because at this point he still doesn't feel nothing. And just as Deku would be looking around at the competition, this is when he would spot Uraraka, looking nervous as ever, as Izuku would kind of just think to himself that he's glad he's not the only one freaking out about things, as Venom would tell him,
"Look out, kid."
All the while Ida would come over towards him, grabbing him by the shoulder and saying, "Hey, it's not cool to try to distract people during their tests. Pay attention to yourself." All the while Izuku would look at him and be like, "Sorry." And as this would happen, President Mike would be like, "Go, go, go, you're in the middle of a real battle." While Deku would just be left there thinking to himself what the heck he can do. This is when suddenly realizing that his quirk is still not activated, Deku would look around to see everybody else like so much further ahead of him as he would think, "Damn, I'm gonna fail," and rush in as fast as he possibly can. As Deku would run in, he would see somebody blasting at one with a robot, Ida kicking one, Kirishima absolutely shattering one with his fist, and even Uraraka placing her hands on robots as he would float into the air and then crash down onto the ground. Deku thinking to himself that he needs to do something fast, making his way towards a one-pointer and having to dodge all of its blows narrowly as he would hope the power of one frog could kick in. But this is when Venom, finally deciding that he's had enough, would take over Deku, saying,
"Sorry, kid, but I'm not gonna be next to a loser."
Transforming into a symbiote state without the spider on his chest, of course. It's just like black suit thing with white eyes as he would wrap his tendrils around one of those robots and then slam him into a building, immediately destroying it. Deku realizing that Venom is incredibly strong, using his abilities to latch onto buildings, seeing as, he's been watching like a lot of like the films and stuff like that Deku has been seeing on the news because Izuku was just obsessed with heroes. So he's constantly watching hero playback missions and stuff like that. And that's where Venom is getting a lot of these ideas from. Primarily Kamui Woods, latching onto some lampposts as making its way towards another robot, he would transform his hand into a gigantic hammer and then crush the robot instantly. With Venom just rampaging through that entire thing, looking as though, okay, how could I best describe it? Have you guys played the Spider-Man 2 game when you're using like the not Venom, but like the anti-Venom, and you're able to just use multiple attacks to just absolutely slaughter either the symbiotes or like robots or even like the random like side characters that are part of like the Fire Quest? That's what he's doing to these freaking sad robots. And after destroying robot after robot after robot and garnering a grand total of 37 hero points, Izuku would tell Venom to let him take over again, saying that it's not right for Venom to be the one that gets him to become a hero. He has to do it himself. So Venom telling him good luck, he would then end up giving control back to Deku, and as Deku would tighten his fist ready to finally use Venom's power, this is when he would look up to see rumbling in the distance. Then multiple classmates or would-be classmates running away from a single origin point, as Izuku would hear the screams of a girl nearby, which would of course be Uraraka, and Deku's in his heart he would think of running because that robot was gigantic in scale and everything inside of Deku's body was telling him danger. But his body would move and he would start rushing towards the direction of the 0-pointer as Venom would scream out,
"Run, kid. You can't win.
And just as that would happen, Izuku would hear the voice of All Might ringing in his head. Clench your buttocks and from the bottom of your heart cry out, smash! So Deku would do just that. Leaping into the air, as reeling his fist back, Deku would feel the power of One for All, all the while Venom internally would think,
it's about time.
And as Deku would reel his fist back, charging up 100% of One for All smash, the symbiote black sludge would wrap around Deku's arm, acting as though it was like a cast, as to not let Deku's arm smash because his two legs were already like just completely destroyed from just the jump, and Venom was now trying to protect Deku subconsciously without Deku even realizing what would happen. So when Deku reeled his fist back and slammed it into the 0-pointer, it completely blew up just like it would in the original, actually being even a little more stronger than you would expect because he would have Venom's amp on top of it. And very cool enough, Deku would receive 0 freaking damage because Venom was there with him and he was able to negate most of the damage. So even though, yes, there's incredible recoil, the man's arm isn't going to be completely destroyed. So as Deku would be realizing this and like look down to see that both of his legs were broken, Venom would say,
you broke your legs using the quirk. It's too powerful for your body. I will get you.
As Izuku would cry, I'd be like, Venom, do something! And suddenly, these black tendrils would wrap around, latching onto multiple buildings, as Izuku would stand up, and Venom's like symbiote stuff would wrap around Deku's legs, giving him the strength to walk, even though his legs are completely charred, and normally he wouldn't be able to stand. Though thankfully, due to Venom's healing factor, which of course we all know he has, Deku's legs would start slowly healing. With him standing in front of Uraraka, who's staring at Deku, who's covered in this like symbiote-like suit, would just be like looking at him in admiration and awe, thinking that she had to save him in that moment, but suddenly something snapped in Deku, his entire just aura shifted, and that was due to the fact that Izuku low-key passed out. And Venom was the one taking over now. So he would stare to the direction of Uraraka, lift the rubble off of her, and then take her to Recovery Girl, as Venom, using Deku's body as like kind of like a meat shield or whatever the heck you want to call it, he would make his way home, where laying him on the bed, Venom would go in to say,
Inko, I'm hungry.
With Deku laying there unconscious on the couch and her asking if he overdid it again. This is when Venom would go on to nod and Inko would say, oh, well, boys will be boys. It's hard to believe you awakened as his quirk only a few months ago. He's gotten so strong in that much time. I mean, look at his arms. They look so muscular, she would say, all the while cooking up a feast for Deku, more specifically Venom, who needs like 4 times the usual calories Deku eats in order for him not to be hungry. And after said feast would finally be done being made, Deku, or more specifically Venom, would start feasting until Deku would finally wake up, and then looking at all of the food around him, he would think to himself that he's so damn full. At this, he looks towards his mom and asks what Venom did, as she would go on to explain that Venom brought him here safely, like always, with Inko saying that she's so glad his quirk has sentience to it. That way she doesn't have to be worried about him all the time. Izuku kind of just thinking to himself, damn, like she can't even trust me, but she trusts this freaking quirk, you know what I mean? With Venom internally being like,
I heard that.
And Deku just being like, I didn't mean anything by it. This is when we would pretty much see Deku and Venom just kind of like waiting to see what happens in terms of like whether Deku got into UA or not, with Venom consistently telling him every other day that he got into UA. Not only did he destroy at least a grand total of 37 robot points, if he was paying attention and keeping proper track of things, but he even showed off that he could destroy a 0-pointer with only 1 punch. If Deku doesn't make it into UA, then he doesn't know how the heck anyone else will. With Izuku feeling pretty confident about himself after, you know, that little pep talk from Venom, and then trying to text All Might, who wouldn't have been responding to his text after all this time, Venom telling him that he probably shouldn't worry about it. If All Might's not responding, there's likely a reason for that. Izuku nodding, as eventually the letter would finally arrive, and we would see Inko coming to Deku's room being like, Izuku, your letter, it's here. Izuku looking at it as he would say, oh, thanks, Mom. Playing it in front of all of them as Venom would be sticking out like to his left side of his neck, and they would be watching the video of All Might saying that Izuku passed with an incredible score of 87 points, saying that he had 37 robot points, 50 rescue points, and he actually managed to get number 1 in terms of the rankings for the entrance exam. All Might being proud of him and telling him that he showed the school that he is here. The recording finally ending with Deku excited as ever, knowing that he'll make it to his academia, and Inko being like, we've got to go out and celebrate. You know, everybody, you know, having a nice time, until finally towards nighttime, All Might would finally text Deku, going on to tell him to meet him at Dagoma Beach, with Deku arriving there alongside Venom, because, he's always there with him, and then telling All Might that if he's being honest, he cheated. He used Venom's power during the test because the quirk One for All still hadn't digested in his system. All Might placing a hand on his shoulder and telling him that he doesn't care about that. He should be proud. He and Venom, he assumes, passed this test, and that's all that matters. He's one step closer to becoming a hero, and now that he has the quirk One for All, he's glad he's able to use it that well from the start. Venom chiming in as he would say,
Izuku can't use the quirk. It completely destroyed his body, and the only reason his legs are intact is because I can heal him from the inside.
All Might kind of like looking at him and be like, oh, I knew that. As Izuku would go on and be like, yeah, Venom helped out a lot more than I'd like to admit. Going on to explain that he was actually the one taking out the robots. All Might being like he actually kind of assumed that, but saying that he knows for a fact Izuku was responsible for the saving of that girl, saying that he's seen him act like that once before, and when he did that, he knew it was Deku. Izuku kind of like smiling for a bit, as All Might would tell him that he can't wait to see him at UA and wish him good luck on his first day. All the while Izuku would look at All Might and say, thanks All Might. Okay, part 2. Pretty sure I left off with Deku just about to get into UA, so let's cover his first day. Alright, the way that I see everything kick-starting off here is that Izuku would be making his way to class, and as he would be doing this, Venom's head would be like sticking out from the back of his shoulder, being like,
this school is interesting.
All the while Deku would turn to Venom and be like, it really is. I can't believe so many heroes before me have come here. Him just geeking out about things until somebody walking by would say, hey, is that your quirk? As Deku would turn and see a girl with blue hair, him just going bright red in the face, with Venom saying,
I'm his quirk. Name is Venom.
Deku being like, yeah, that's his name. Him nodding as Venom would pretty much smack Deku in the back of the head using his own symbiote stuff, and Nejire would say that that's so funny, asking if he's one of the new first years. Deku saying that he actually is, with her saying that she doesn't mind pointing out where his classroom is gonna be, asking if he's part of the general course, 1A or 1B, with Venom being like,
we are part of 1A.
And Nejire saying, oh, you actually walked past it. It's over there. Her pointing and wishing Deku good luck as he would make his way to the classroom, and finally once there opening the door, Deku would be greeted to the side of Bakugo and Ida both fighting each other. That is, until Deku and Bakugo would make eye contact, and Bakugo would stare at Deku with eyes filled with rage, cause cue flashback, Deku and Bakugo, much like in the original story, after passing the UA entrance exam and that pretty much became public, their middle school ended up being so proud of the two of them that they wanted to like have like an announcement, you know what I mean? And because of that, what ends up taking place is that Bakugo, once again like in the original timeline, he would end up cornering Deku at some like back alley, asking how in the world he managed to get into UA while being quirkless. However, this is when Venom, not able to stay silent any longer, would pop out from the side of Deku's head and say,
we aren't quirkless.
As Deku would stare at Bakugo, and Bakugo would like kind of grit his teeth and clench his fist. This is when, going on to crackle a few explosions, Bakugo would ask him how long he's been hiding this from him. With Deku kind of like having beat drops going down his face of sweat, him just like thinking of some excuse that he could say, until the principal would come from the corner and be like, you boys ready to finally give your word on how this has changed your lives? Bakugo would be like, be right over there, just glaring at Deku one more time, with the flashback basically ending there. As Deku would make his way towards the seat, he'd be super stiff and everybody would be wondering why Deku's so afraid of that guy. But this is when suddenly Aizawa would cut the tension in the room and he would tell everybody to meet him outside. Us now getting the first part of the exam, which would be Aizawa telling Deku to throw this ball as far as he can, because remember, Deku in this timeline actually ended up getting first place, and the first place holder was the one to throw the ball just to show off what they're gonna do. So with Deku having this ball being handed to him, he would ask Aizawa what he's supposed to do with this, and Aizawa would tell him it's simple, use your quirk to throw it as far as possible, but remain within that circle. Venom internally speaking to him and telling him to use One for All in his power in sync. If he does, Izuku could use the power fully. So this is when Deku clenching his fists and thinking that Venom's a part of him and he should stop thinking of him as like a side thing, because you know, obviously he's had a few more months to think about how things have been going, plus the week of Venom actively helping helping him, and even Inko trusting Venom, Deku would finally think that it's not wrong to use Venom. So, stepping to the plate, Deku would cover his arm with black sludge as lightning sparks would appear, and Deku would throw that thing far as ever. Actually, I think All Might could quite literally throw that thing into space. Add a Venom amp to that, there's no way this man's not getting infinity. Deku would 1,000,000% just throw that ball into outer space, and as everybody else would watch and be stunned at the level of strength, not to mention the blowback force that was created by this and the weather changes that actively happened when the ball broke through the stratosphere, we would have everybody shocked. All the while Bakugo, through gritted teeth, would then blast off an explosion rushing to fight Deku. However, before anything could happen, the scarf would wrap around Bakugo's body and he would tell him that one more of those outbursts and he'll be expelled. Bakugo glaring at Deku with eyes that just scream murder as he would say, "You've been hiding this power from me all this damn time and laughing about it behind my back, haven't you?" All the while Deku would just kind of be staring at Bakugo with a saddened expression, with Venom telling him good riddance internally. This is when the class would go back to focusing on the actual point of these exams, and by the time that everything would be done, Deku would 1,000,000% have first place. Because keep in mind, Deku has 100% of One For All at his disposal at this point in the story, so him leaping from side to side would be an ease. He would shatter the grip strength machine, destroy the punch machine, which is an addition I add to some of my videos, absolutely go nuts on the freaking sit-ups and push-ups portion of the exam, and the long jumps, the dash, like all that, forget about it. Deku is going crazy. In fact, he's actively using the tendrils like Black Whip, attaching some sludge like web things, kind of like what Venom actually has, and then kicking off to propel himself even faster, using like a really cool like All Might / Black Whip combination of movement. So by the end of everything, Deku would have quite literally have broken every single UA record there has been when it comes to any of these basic simple exams, shocking everybody, but more so Aizawa, who would think that this kid is going to be the next #1 hero. This is not even a contest. And Todoroki in the background, who would have thought himself to be the best in the classroom, would realize that he doesn't even light a candle to this kid. And by the end of everything, we would pretty much see Deku like getting crowded by everybody, his like shy, personality coming out to the surface, with everybody being like, "Dude, how is your quirk so strong? What is that black sludge? Does it make you stronger than All Might?" And Deku just kind of like freaking out internally until Venom's head would come out and say,
"We are tired. Can't you tell? Izuku is not a social butterfly. So unless you want to be eaten, I recommend you step back."
Deku being like, "Sorry about him. My quirk is called Venom. It gives me incredible strength boosts and it's sentient." Tokiyami stepping forth from the crowd as it would say, "So you also possess a quirk that allows itself to have some sort of sentience. It's nice to meet you. My name is Tokiyami and this is Dark Shadow." Venom staring at Dark Shadow like almost into like its soul, as Dark Shadow would like look back at Venom and just stare at like an abyss. Like there was nothing but just strangeness there, because Venom wouldn't have only now have the attachment to Deku, but to One For All itself, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I digress. After the day would finally be over, a lot of things would be going through different students' heads. Todoroki is dealing with the fact that he's not the best. Momo would be shocked that someone like that exists. Uraraka is stunned that that boy was the one responsible for saving her. Bakugo, he just feels rage. Like there's nothing but rage. All his life he had thought of Izuku to be inferior to him, only to find out that this whole time, Deku's been so much stronger than him, and he had no idea. So yeah, that's gonna for sure be affecting Bakugo mentally. And by the time that we jump cut back to the actual schooling stuff that happens, we would see Deku in the cafeteria surrounded by a bunch of his classmates, not just Tenya or Uraraka, as they're all talking about Deku, asking how cool it must be to have such an amazing quirk, them saying that he must have been super popular growing up, until it would actually come out via Deku that he wasn't. He was actually a little bit of a loser and he was a late bloomer. Everybody would be like, "What? How could your quirk have been a late bloomer?" Him going on to explain maybe it had to do with the power, but he actually recently awakened his quirk. Venom having told them that Bakugo was listening and he should come up with some sort of an excuse, since Deku and Bakugo both, or not Deku and Bakugo, but Deku and Venom both have Deku's memories, meaning Venom, as much as he understands like that, all the horrible stuff that Bakugo's done to him, he also understands Deku's psyche. So he knows that even though a normal person would probably, gain power and just absolutely lord it over the person who's made them feel small their whole life, Deku's just not like that. He's genuinely a hero, which would affect the way that Venom thinks, meaning that he would have told Izuku to likely create an excuse. And so the whole late bloomer theory was created, going on to explain that, oh, my quirk activated late because it had so much power and it likely would have destroyed my body if I got it even sooner. Everyone buying that answer, as we would then move on to the final class of the day, which is of course the hero course training. And once this whole thing would start, Deku would be sitting towards the back of the classroom just waiting for class to start, kind of like twiddling around with a pencil, all the while internally having a conversation with Venom about what to expect, different ways to use their quirk, because like they've been thinking about that type of stuff since that hero stuff is always on Deku's mind. In turn, this has started to affect Venom. We would then suddenly see All Might burst through the classroom with a Silver Age costume on, just being like, I am here, coming in through the door like a normal person, going on to shock everybody, especially Deku, who would be stunned at the fact that All Might himself, the symbol of peace, is going to be his teacher, which is kind of strange considering the fact that he mentored him for months on end. But yeah, Deku would still be freaking out about All Might because he looks up to this man like he was some sort of god, and as All Might would be talking, he would go on to tell everybody that he's proud to be their teacher, and then click a button behind his belt, telling everybody that he's always thought that the clothes make the pros, going on to show everybody their costumes and all that other stuff, as they would all get changed and the whole little my hero song would play in the background. This then leaving us to have Deku come outside with this green little outfit that he has on, and everybody's staring at him being like, that's your hero costume? Deku saying, yeah, his mom made it for him, as some people would think that it's hilarious and other people would think it's kind of cute, namely Uraraka. But as the rules for this next thing that they're about to be doing would start to be explained, we would have All Might go on to tell everybody that they're going to be needing to pick out tallies, and whoever they get with is pretty much going to be their teammates, and they're going to be playing the roles of heroes versus villains. So Deku would be one of the first people up, and he would go on to select Uraraka as his teammate. And after all that would happen, we would have All Might go on to randomly shuffle the teams into heroes and villains, and then create the whole thing for everyone to fight off against each other. This then ultimately leading to Deku versus Bakugo, which would be quite interesting because when Bakugo would hear that he's facing off against Deku, there would be two emotions: hesitance and fear. Because though Deku right now is sitting there with a silly costume on, smiling and acting as though nothing's going wrong, he's wielding the power of a practical nuke in his hand, and Bakugo doesn't know if he can take him. He's been having that thought, or that picture in his mind of Deku throwing a ball into space. What would happen if a punch were to connect on him? But Bakugo would wipe those thoughts from his head, and he would simply shoulder check Deku walking past him, kind of psyching himself up for the battle that's to come. All the while Deku would stare at Bakugo from the back, and he would think to himself that he hopes Bakugo will keep himself level-headed. All the while Venom would tell Izuku that he shouldn't worry. With the power of One for All, there's no way that kid's gonna be able to lay a scratch on him. Sure, his explosions will be harmful to him because it's his weakness, but apart from that, they should be fine. This is when we would see Deku and Uraraka making their way up to the top. I know I said they were heroes, but actually let's say that they're villains this time, because I want this one scene to play out. As they make their way to the top, to the bomb room, Deku and Uraraka would start thinking about how they're gonna, play the heroes, or sorry, the villains. So this is when Venom would stick out from Deku's side and say,
I have an idea. We shall cover this room with webs, and once we do, it'll be impossible for them to reach the bomb.
As Deku would say that that's a good idea, and even Uraraka would as well, going on to touch all the furniture in the room and placing it around the bomb as to I don't know the best way to explain it, but kind of create a little thing. Have you guys ever played Bed Wars in Minecraft? That's kind of what they did. They created a barrier between the bed, or the bomb, and the stuff. And then also some of the other stuff that would be in the room would have been tied up with the webs. So just imagine walking into this room, after finally discovering where the heck the bomb room is at, and the first thing you're greeted to is these black webs covering everything, with a bunch of random furniture also just hanging from the ceilings and stuff like that. That is low-key a pretty cool scene. And after that would finally be done happening, we would see Deku turn to Uraraka and ask what her best villain laugh is. Her, doing a very cringe one as Deku would start laughing and then he does his own, like cringing out at Araka. This is when after both of them would finally like finish having a bit of fun, Venom would go on to say that they don't look very villainous, telling Deku he'll help, covering the entirety of his costume and transforming it into a black Venom version of it, which looks so cool. Mind you, there's no Spider-Man symbol because there is no Spider-Man to base that off of, and so we basically just have this buff looking like Venom thing with bunny ears. It kind of looks super creepy. But as Deku would stand there and even Uraraka would see him, she would see that he looks so freaking villainous and cool. Deku smiling as we would then hear the sounds of explosions getting closer and closer. And out of nowhere, we would see Ida opening the door fast as ever and running in, just instantly getting caught off guard by all of the webs covering the room. Ida trying to tear it off of him as he would cry out, "What is this, villains? What have you used to trap this room with?" As Bakugo would come in behind him and blast an explosion, freeing Ida, telling the four-eyed bastard to stay out of his way. Lunging to the direction of Izuku and blasting off his explosions to destroy the webs that Izuku would have left behind, as Deku would catch the hand of Bakugo and throw him into some webs, his body getting tangled up as he would fight and try his best to get out of that situation. But Izuku, knowing that Bakugo's not one to give up, he'd immediately reach for his capture tape and go to lunge to the direction of Bakugo. However, just as that would happen, Bakugo would manage to somehow unpin one of the gauntlets and blast it directly in Deku's face, blowing off some of the Venom symbiote from his costume and destroying the actual like green one that he has underneath, as Deku would look back at Bakugo and Bakugo coming out from the smoke and everything, since he would have practically wiped out all the explosions. As a matter of fact, even the damn nuke on the other side of the room would be like crushed up because the explosion was super crazy, and Uraraka over there barely managed to like protect herself because of like her gear. All Might just crying out like in the intercom being like, "Katsuki, you can't," until he obviously did it. And now we have Bakugo walking out of the smoke towards Deku, just ready to blast off another one because in his eyes, he wants to show he's still stronger. However, before Bakugo could do anything, All Might would end up arriving, grabbing onto Bakugo and telling him, "Young man, come with me." This would then be followed up by Bakugo straight up getting expelled, with Izuku, Uraraka, and Ida all kind of like being like sat outside of the actual office of Nezu, where Bakugo would walk outside with his mom Mitsuki just angry as ever, her smacking him across the head saying that it's his damn fault, all the while Bakugo would step outside and glare at Deku. After this would happen, he and the rest of them would go inside as they would go on to give their own witnesses and also apology from Nezu, saying that something like this should never happen at their school, as we would then go on to pretty much have Nezu saying that he feels bad that he had to kick out Bakugo, but a student who can't control his emotions shouldn't be a hero. And after that would happen, we would have Deku just kind of being the last one sitting there, Principal Nezu asking why the young man showed such disdain toward him. All Might walking into the room in a Small Might form, as we would have Deku going on to explain that for all of his life he was quirkless, and Bakugo was always the strong one. He was the one with the friends, he was the one with the talent, he was the one that bullied him, that made him feel small all his life. And one day, he was given the power of a symbiote by mere chance. Then, All Might chose him to be his successor. And everything just fell into place. He didn't ask for the power, of course he's glad for it, but it's not like he wanted to have that type of reaction from Bakugo. And as Nezu would hear that, he would just kind of nod, going on to tell Izuku that he shouldn't blame himself for the outcome, saying that Bakugo will likely bounce back from this, join a different hero school, and bygones will be bygones. However, for now, he hopes Izuku can accept his apology, and nothing will be done about this. So Izuku would pretty much end up going home, and once there, Deku would kind of just sit there in silence, Venom and him talking back and forth about, what happened with Bakugo. Venom saying that he didn't like the look on Bakugo's face when they, finally made eye contact for the final time. Him going on to tell him that he should watch out for Bakugo in the future, as Deku would go on to tell, Venom that Bakugo may be a jerk, but he's not dangerous, at least not to anyone else. Us then skipping forward, as we would now have the students in the back of a bus, all making their way towards the USJ. It's here that a conversation would spike up about who the strongest in the class is, saying that now that Bakugo's gone, it's really only a race between Todoroki and Deku. People saying that it has to be Deku though, because his performance during the first day in the practical exam was incredible. This being followed up by Kaminari saying it should be obvious, what with Deku tanking a full power explosion to the face that not only injured Ida but also Uraraka, saying that to tank that point blank and walk out like nothing, it's practically an All Might level feat. And as everybody else would be discussing this is when they would finally make it to the actual USJ area, everybody getting off of the bus and thinking about what's to come. As soon as they would do this, they would go on to spot another pro hero nearby, and who else but Quagmire? No, I'm kidding. It'd be Hero 13, going on to give the little speech about, how quirks are dangerous, yada yada yada, with Venom internally inside of Deku being all like,
"This is boring. When will the action start?"
This being cut off by Kurogiri warp gating to the center of the USJ and apologizing for his interruption, as Venom would cry out,
"Finally!"
as a tendril would stick out to the direction of Kurogiri and it would spread out like a spider net before latching onto Kurogiri's weak spot and Kurogiri beginning to get dragged in towards Deku. Deku wondering what the heck Venom's doing, as Venom would say,
"Passing the class,"
slamming Kurogiri onto the ground and holding him there, with 13 and Aizawa just shocked. He had reacted faster than anybody could have even processed what the heck was happening. So with Aizawa noticing that there's villains down below, he would go on to tell Izuku to hold down that villain as much as possible, although while the rest of Class 1A would exit the area and 13 would stand by with the kids. As Izuku would stand there with Kurogiri by his side, he would think of the fact that Aizawa was currently fighting in a 1v20, and so, knowing that he probably shouldn't get involved and just wait for the heroes, Deku would go on to tie down Kurogiri with even more webbing before then making his way towards the direction of Aizawa, using Venom's tendrils like spider webs and flying down as he would go on to shoot them towards multiple different villains, with them all trying to frantically take this sludgy stuff off of them, as Izuku would arrive, turn his arm into a hammer, and slam one of the largest villains nearby, sending him into straight unconsciousness. This then being followed up by Shigaraki watching all this, saying to the Nomu,
"Come on, Nomu. What are you doing just standing there? Kill the brat! Can't you see he's ruining everything?"
With the Nomu lunging at Deku and Venom saying,
"Look out."
This is when Deku looking up would go on to create a shield with his arm, tanking the blow of the Nomu and being pushed back slightly, as Izuku with his other arm, he would turn it into a gigantic spiked ball, slamming it directly into the head of the Nomu, sending it backwards. Deku be like, "Venom, that was too far," as Venom would tell him that he was just checking something. The Nomu then healing, as Shigaraki would start to spout about how the Nomu was created to kill All Might himself. Venom telling Izuku that this thing is not human, and it meant one thing:
"We can go all out."
Leaving Deku and Venom to have a merged subconsciousness, both of them fighting, Deku pulling back just enough, but Venom using the movements and improvising, as he would go on to create different things with his arms. In one, a scythe, chopping off the arm of the Nomu as it would regenerate, meanwhile trying to hit Deku with his other arm, and Deku would block it as he would punch it in the stomach, then sending the Nomu back, grabbing him by his arm and pulling him back, as Venom would go on to create his other arm into a gigantic jackhammer-like thing, slamming it directly into the brain of the Nomu, as he would start to jackhammer into the actual brain of the Nomu, it exploding, as Izuku would just be left standing there in the smoke with this large silhouette black symbiote covering him with lightning sparks going all over him. Shigaraki taking 2 steps back as he would say, You killed the Nomu! How? Although while Deku would do the iconic Venom roar, tongue slurring out everywhere, and we would see Shigaraki lunge at him, trying to decay him fast as possible. But the moment he would place his hands on Deku, nothing would happen, and Shigaraki would freak out. Why? Why isn't my quirk working? He would think, as Deku would wrap his tendrils around him and hold them down until the rest of the heroes would arrive, telling Venom that he's out of his mind. He didn't need to take it that far with that villain over there, hoping that he doesn't get expelled for that performance. Venom saying,
"I've told you already, that thing wasn't human. It needed to be purged.
And this is when we would see Shigaraki looking up at Venom, wondering what his fate will be. But suddenly, All Might would arrive out of nowhere, looking like a total hero to Shigaraki, who in this moment genuinely thought he could have died, as we would then see the entire cleanup process beginning. All Might getting a statement from Aizawa, who, having watched the whole thing, would tell All Might that they'll speak on the matter at a different time, saying that they're going to be needing Principal Nezu present. So, after about a week would pass and Izuku would find himself back at UA, first thing in the morning, Deku would find himself inside of the principal's office, where he would pretty much get chewed out by Aizawa, following that up with Nezu going on to explain to him that while he appreciates him saving everybody, he ultimately put himself in danger and acted as a hero even though he didn't even have a heroic license, telling him that he'll be getting 2 days of detention, and though he knows it's fair, it is the just thing to do. Izuku walking out, as Venom would pretty much like stick his head out and be like,
"That's not fair. We saved them. They should be thanking us."
with Deku being like, fair? I should have been expelled. You're talking about fair?
That's nonsense. We should have been thrown a parade, or at least had no punishment.
As Izuku would roll his eyes, and we would then have approximately, what, I want to say 3 days pass, until Aizawa would finally drop the revelation that they're going to be having the UA Sports Festival. Everybody getting hyped up, Muraraka more than ever, as everybody would start to think about what they're going to do, get excited, and just as class would end, and everybody would be about to step out, this is where we would get the whole scouting of the other classes, because they would come to try to see what the competition would look like. Things changing in this timeline slightly, because Bakugo wouldn't be there to piss everyone off by calling them extras, making everybody else think like UA was just some stuck-up bastards. So, with that being said, we would essentially jump cut straight to the actual USJ, or Sports Festival, sorry, as we would see Izuku going up to the podium, since remember, he would have gotten first place at the events, give a very, very shaky speech, in which case Venom would come out and say,
"Apologies, but Izuku's not very good with speeches. However, I harbor no such flaw, and I promise this, we will win."
Okay, time out for a second. I just low-key messed up my whole throat doing that. Anyways, after this would take place, we would have the entirety of the stadium like in an outrage. Some people confused, like, how did the tone shift so differently? Like, what is that? Like, is that his quirk? As we have President Mike going on the intercoms being like, "That's Izuku Midoriya for ya. He has a sentient quirk by the name of Venom. It gives him incredible enhancements. Just wait and see." As we would then go on to see Izuku straight at the finish line waiting for everything to start, as we would see Deku and Venom arguing, him saying that he had no reason to say something like that, as Venom internally would tell him to act as strong as he is, saying that he's no longer that weak kid that got bullied a long time ago.
"Now you have me."
The race starting as we would see 2 tendrils wrap around the roof of the entrance, and we would have Deku blast off, using the powers of One For All in tandem with Venom's tendrils, as we would see Deku clear the entire obstacle course in 2 seconds, shocking everybody. President Mike and Aizawa having the same reaction that Mike would have when Todoroki froze half of the arena solid. And so, with the first event being completely over with, we would now see Izuku jumping into the second event, which would of course be the obstacle course, with one change happening. Everybody, and I do mean everybody, wants to be Deku's teammate, because after seeing how strong he was, a lot of people were looking for a quick ticket to the next round. But because I hate this event and I don't feel like covering it, I'm going to be saying that the same exact layout that ends up taking place in the next event ends up happening. And because I don't want the fights to be exactly the same every time, I'm going to be doing a random name generator to see who Deku's going to be facing first. So,
Be right back.
I'm not gonna lie, I just lost so much aura. Anyways, Deku's first opponent's gonna be Kendo. So as Izuku would make his way onto the stadium, he would look at Kendo kind of nervously, her saying that he doesn't have to hold back, that she may be a girl, but she's in the hero course just as much as he is. So if he does that, he'll take that as more disrespectful than if he would have to beat her up. So Izuku hearing that, and Venom pretty much having been given the go-ahead, he would end up saying,
"Very well.
transforming into his gigantic like bunny-like state. You know, Deku doesn't even actually have the costume up, but now he's like a black bunny thing, which looks like it's been taking steroids for years, as he would bombard Kendo, who transforming her hands into these gigantic like things to try to blow him back. She would attempt that, but it would just be completely futile. And Deku would straight up just charge her off of the arena, sending her crashing onto the grass as she would gasp for air, just being like, you know, realizing that, yeah, maybe she shouldn't have said to Deku to go all out. And as the crowd would watch, they'd start booing Deku, saying he didn't have to take things that far, with Deku freaking out eternally, being like, Venom, we used too much strength, and Kendo getting up slowly, being like, it's okay, I promise, I asked for that. As you know, everybody's like, oh really? And then they all like, you know, kind of chill out, which ultimately leaves Deku to having his next match, which unfortunately in this timeline is going to be going up against Kirishima. And just in case you guys don't get me, when I say unfortunately, I mean for Kirishima, because bro's about to get completely destroyed during this event, which would all kickstart with Kirishima telling Deku not to hold anything back and hardening as much as he can, rushing towards Deku, who aiming his hand at the ground would then shoot like a basically spider webs at his feet, nailing him stuck to the ground as Deku would lunge towards him, and then creating a gigantic hammer in his left arm. Deku would bash Kirishima across the chest, sending him crashing directly into the wall of the UA Sports Festival. Him being concaved in that and being stuck in there, as you know, he's of course out of the whole thing. Like, he's not necessarily like too hurt, because remember, he's hardening, but realizing he can't get out, Kirishima would undo his hardening, hit the grass, and then pretty much tell Deku that that was a manly way to end the battle, as Izuku would move on, and his next opponent would be Tokiyami. Kicking things off with the pair both kind of like nodding at each other, and Dark Shadow coming out ready to fight. This leaving Venom to come out and say,
"Let me fight him,"
as he would take full control of Deku and reject usage of One For All. This is when he would leap up into the air and create two gigantic scythes on each hand, as he would slash down directly on Dark Shadow, who using his powers would attempt to block the attack, but it would be useless, as that simple slash would destroy his defenses, and out from his stomach, Venom would protrude a fist that would punch Tokiyami directly in the face, this knocking him out of the arena, as Venom would lift one arm up in a gigantic bunny-like state, as Izuku would go on to ask Venom why he wanted to fight him personally.
"Because it felt like fighting another symbiote. I haven't done that in years."
Izuku nodding as he would look up at the gigantic billboard that would go on to show the bracket, and it would show Todoroki and Izuku as the final opponents. This then leaving Todoroki to go drop a declaration of war on Deku and tell him that he's gonna freeze him solid and show everybody, you know, obviously the people who would be in the room with Deku, that he's the strongest. And so, the moment that this match would begin, Izuku would turn to Venom and tell him that Todoroki won't be using his ice, so he won't be using his powers this match. And so, the battle would kind of play out much similar to what you expect in the original timeline, with Deku using his fingers to get close to Todoroki, closing the gap bit by bit, as the power of full cowling would be something that Izuku already has at his disposal. Considering the fact that Venom being there, he likely would have been a very good teacher for Deku. And so, with that being the case, Deku would tap into 10% of One For All and land a kick directly in the stomach of Todoroki, sending him backward, who would be shocked, and then finally stopping, having an ice wall behind him to keep himself from falling out of the ring. Todoroki would ask Deku why he's not using his power all the way, as Todoroki would tell him that it's because he's not, with Todoroki looking up and engulfing in flames, telling him that he asked for this. As the power of the symbiote would engulf Izuku's hand, it would heal and Deku would reel it back before then punching at Todoroki, shattering every semblance of ice behind him, changing the weather, and pretty much hospitalizing the kid, leaving Todoroki to lift up his arm in like a retaliation, but just dropping it, realizing that he had nothing left. So, as Deku would be there left standing, everybody watching his triumphant victory, Deku would raise one fist, as out from behind him, Venom would come out and say,
"We are Venom."
With the crowd erupting in cheers, and some people being kind of pleased. I mean, the battles that Deku was a part of were quick, but they were kind of good dopamine hits. So with that being the case, Deku would be awarded the first place medal, and multiple people would be watching that on the TV, namely Inko, the League of Villains, and Katsuki Bakugo. but that's something for later, if I remember that's even a plot point, that is. Anyways, after the UA Sports Festival event would finally be over, we would have the students returning back to UA, where they would find themselves in class when suddenly Aizawa would announce that they're going to be having a special guest. This is when the X-rated hero Midnight would come in, and she would go on to tell everybody that they need to pick their hero names. Zuko actually being one of the first ones to go up there, seeing as he's known what he was going to call himself for a while now. Venom, the name that Venom had begged and begged and begged and begged for Deku to take forever now. So, after choosing that name, Deku would go through the list of people that wanted to recruit him. But just as Deku would be looking at that long list of applicants, Deku would go on to be interrupted by All Might, who would say, "Young man, psst, psst, come here," going on to pretty much tell him, "You want some candy?" As he would go on to pretty much give him the offer of going with Gran Torino. This would ultimately leave Deku to boarding a train towards that city, as he would arrive straight to the room of Gran Torino, and the moment that he would get there, he would see ketchup all over his body, as he would be greeted to an unconscious old man, Zuko freaking out as Venom would say,
Calm down. The man isn't dead. He's nearly sleeping.
As Gran Torino would smirk, and he would start rampaging throughout all the walls, jumping from wall to wall to wall to wall, changing trajectory fast as ever. Zuko instantly making the connection and knowing that this is likely a test. Tracking the trajectories, as he would realize one thing: Gran Torino is mostly unpredictable, but there's a pattern, and so creating a bunch of webbing and spreading it throughout the room, making it impossible for Gran Torino to shift directions and have to force him to take like a ricochet angle towards him. Izuku would catch him off guard, extending one of his arms towards him as it would wrap around him with this black goo, and now pulling him towards him. Izuku would ask why he decided to greet him this way, with Gran Torino smirking and saying that All Might was right, he truly was the full package. This is when Gran Torino would go on to explain what it was like training All Might all those years ago, and we would have Gran Torino meeting Venom, just being like, "So, you're the space alien, huh?" As Venom would go on to greet him, or like introduce himself, saying,
I am Venom.
Gran Torino being like, I know, as he would go on and tell him to come on now. They're going to go on a patrol, saying that there's not much that he could teach him offensively, what with the kid already having a mentor in a space alien or whatever. And so, we would pretty much have the Gran Torino arc, or the Stain arc, pretty much consist of a bunch of hero patrol, everything only getting interesting until they would finally board the train to Hosu, since the first couple of days would be a bit stale. So with the sleeping Gran Torino next to him, Izuku would be looking out the window when he would notice a gigantic Nomu-like creature with wings was flying towards them, and immediately tapping into the powers of Venom, Izuku would lunge out of the window, shattering out of the train as he would wrap one of his tendrils around the Nomu and then slam him down into the building, completely leaving that thing unconscious. This is when Gran Torino, finally having used his quirk to catch up to Deku, would ask what happened, and Izuku would go on to explain that there's a Nomu here, and that likely means
there's more.
Us watching as Gran Torino and Deku would swing throughout the city, well obviously Gran Torino using his jet quirk, and Deku swinging throughout the city just like Spider-Man would, until ultimately from the corner of his eye, Deku would catch a sight of Ida, being shocked at the fact that he was here of all places, and landing nearby, Izuku would watch from the roof as Stain would be about to impale Ida. However, just before doing so, he would notice Venom from the corner of his eye and throw a dagger towards him, Venom absorbing it directly into his skin, sludge-like body, as we would see him screech to the direction of Stain, and we would then hear Venom internally being like,
Can I eat him?
All the while Deku would be like, no, you can't eat him. We've been over this. Venom jumping down as the two of them would now stare at each other, and Stain, taking out a blade, would then go on to lick it, telling him that if he's here to defend this fake hero, then he must be one of them. Lunging towards him and attempting to strike at him as Venom's tendrils would wrap around Venom's sword, and his body would harden to the point that Stain had no openings. There was no blows he could feasibly land on him, so before Stain could realize what had happened, Izuku's speed would pick up instantly, finally using One For All as he would slam a fist directly into the villain's ribcage, sending him crashing into a green dumpster and falling down onto the ground unconscious. All the while Deku, finally having Venom come off of his face, would walk over towards him, being like, Ida, are you okay? Ida looking at him and saying, get away, this is my fight, as Deku would tell him that he's an idiot for that, asking if he really thinks he would do that, saying that a hero's job is to meddle when nobody asks you to, as Ida would finally pass out into unconsciousness, having lost a lot of blood, and we would see Deku capturing Stain in his black webs, then taking him to the police station and helping Ida to go to the hospital. This is where we would have the Stain arc completely ending, as the police dog officer that we see in the original timeline would bow down in respect to Deku, all the while Venom internally would say,
"That's more like it. This is the thanks that we should have gotten after the USJ."
with Deku kind of rolling his eyes, thinking that Venom does have a point, but I mean, he doesn't like to admit it. And so, we would then jump cut to what happens after this arc. The whole little like hero rescue race that takes place, just to see where everybody would be at. Izuku doing extremely well since of course, we've already seen this man destroy the obstacle course at the UA Sports Festival in 2 seconds. So it would take him about 4 to localize All Might, and once that was done, well, All Might was already rescued in the, fake simulation course. So after that would take place, we would now be free to move on to the final exams arc section of the story. And with the written portion being more of like the lame stuff that nobody really cares about, we're going to be skipping that and getting directly into the battle between Deku and All Might. Because remember, no Bakugo means that the teams would be a bit unbalanced. However, Nezu did want to see something, and he figured his classmates deserved the right to see that as well. So we would have a battle between All Might and Deku being set up, since Izuku was the strongest in the classroom. So as everybody would watch on anticipating All Might to win, we would see 2 people flying at each other as 2 fists would smash into the other, and All Might's arm would instantly be blown backwards as the bones would break, and Izuku would land a blow directly in All Might's face, going directly at full throttle, seeing as Venom and Deku were both itching to test their strength. Venom having a bit of an influence on Deku after all this time, with Deku instantly kind of like just being like, "Oh my!" Like freaking out, like going to his aid and be like, "I'm so sorry, All Might. I let things get the better of me. Venom talked me into it." Venom being like,
"I did not."
As Izuku would say, "Okay, fine, it was me, but please forgive me, All Might." As All Might would laugh, be like, "Ha ha 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 ha, young Midoriya. I'm happy to see you're still your usual self, but don't think I'm so weak that something like that would take me out." Getting back up as he would attempt to fight Deku once more, and now Deku being more apprehensive, he would use a buttload of webbing to cover All Might's eyes and limbs together, which he would snap instantly, just like throwing them off like they were never even there, as Izuku would swift to the finish line, and once there, Venom's voice would be ringing in Deku's ear, saying that this is disrespectful to All Might, and that All Might would never want to lose to his protege in this fashion. Deku stopping just short of the exit, as All Might would be behind him, telling him, "That's more like it," reeling his fist back and throwing a Carolina smash, which Deku would block, before then shooting tendrils at the feet of All Might, attaching him to the ground, and then, with a gigantic jackhammer fist, he would slam it directly into the stomach of All Might, the side that isn't injured, sending him crashing backwards, as he would go on to wrap him up with capture tape, and we would have the winner of the event taking place. Everybody realizing that not only was Deku stronger than everyone in the class this whole time, but he was stronger than the symbol of peace, which just makes everybody lose their freaking minds, as we would get into the next arc, which of course would be the Forest of Death. Jump cutting to the scene of Venom going absolutely nuts on the mud monsters that would be created by, I forgot her name to be honest, and we would just see this man just dismantling one after the other. Class 1A just kind of standing there being like, "Aren't we supposed to help?" As Venom would be having the time of his life. Izuku kind of letting him have this because he doesn't really get to go rampant, and since she's able to create these mud monsters for him, well, I mean, it's a pretty good source of training. So once the entire section of the forest would be cleared and they would make it back to base camp way earlier than in the original, we would see them be shocked, being like, "Wow, you guys actually got here at around the same time we would have. What did you do?" The rest of the class just being like, "We did absolutely nothing." As Deku would make his way towards the, the little feast that they've made it for them, and Venom would just start absorbing the food like he was Patrick in that one conch shell episode. The one where Squidward kept pulling the she shell, and the conch shell would be like, "No, no." And then Patrick would be like, "Can I eat this delicious sea sausage, this magic conch shell?" Yes. Why did I do that? I don't know, man. I'm walling today. Okay. After that would happen, I just imagined that scene one more time. My bad. Okay. After that would happen, we would then go on to see Izuku training late night in the forest against Tiger, a bunch of mud clones, and even ectoplasm would be there, courtesy of Deku requesting that teacher due to the fact that his training would be enhanced by that. And as we see Deku dismantling the final clone, his classmate Momo would walk over towards him with like a fiber cloth towel, telling him to use this, him wiping off the sweat, as Momo would go on to ask Izuku if he could explain his quirk a little bit better, saying that she's been fascinated by it ever since he defeated All Might, with Izuku turning towards her and saying, sure, what do you want to know? Izuku walking and talking with Momo until he would notice that Koda was gone, asking Momo if they can pick up this conversation later because he needed to go check something out. And this is when Deku, following the small trail of footsteps that Koda left behind, would find a scene of Muscular and Koda. Deku seeing everything shift around him slowly as ever as Muscular's fists would get closer and closer, and Deku could see Koda's face just warp and transfigure into something of horror, fear, and just uncertainty. And just before the fist could connect, completely killing Koda, mind you, it would have like splattered Koda's brains like a freaking watermelon. Deku would blitz in there at 100%, the Venom symbiote having covered his legs, arms, and entire body, as Koda would be saved from that instant, and Deku would look up with rage never seen before in the series, asking Muscular why he would try to kill him like that, with Muscular lifting up his fist and saying, whoa, guess you're a fast one, ain't ya? It's gonna be kind of fun when I as Deku would speed blitz in, not even listening to what this dude had to say, and slam his fist directly under the chin of Muscular, sending him flying into the air, as two Venom symbiote webs would cover him and pull him back, only for Deku now to drive both of his legs directly into Muscular's stomach, sending him back into the air, as Izuku would go on to blast Muscular's face with different webbings, completely surround him, grab him like he was a freaking like piñata, start spinning him in the air, and then slam him into the side of the mountain, which ultimately leaves Muscular completely unconscious, the man barely able to be like, just kind of sitting there twitching, barely holding on to consciousness, while Deku just kind of walks over towards him and asks why he would do that. Muscular not being able to say a thing, as Deku would turn to Koda with like that Venom symbiote like villainous costume on, and Koda would like take a step back before like reaching for Izuku, though scared because Deku low-key did look like a villain in that moment, especially after that crazy performance, and Koda was taken back towards Aizawa. This is when we would see Deku internally listen to the voice of Venom that would be telling him,
your friends are in danger. We must go help them.
As Deku would nod, and then before Aizawa can even do anything or even try to cancel his quirk, Deku's tendrils would extend towards the tree line, flying away, although while Aizawa would have tried to use his erasure quirk and realized that the Venom symbiote didn't disappear, shocking Aizawa because he knows he erased something, but it wasn't the quirk, which left Aizawa confused. Did Deku have more than one quirk? All the while the young boy would be flying through the trees, now out of Aizawa's peripheral, and Venom would tell Deku,
Eraserhead took one for all for a moment, but it is back. Use the power and find our classmates.
With Deku swinging faster than ever and eventually arriving to the scene of Tokiyami and Shoji, Izuku recognizing that his classmate was in agony, then using the power of One for All to straight up send Tokiyami flying into the sky as close to the moonlight as possible, which would allow Tokiyami to regain control over Dark Shadow just long enough, with Izuku laying down like a webbing down below like a trampoline, with Tokiyami landing on it and thanking Deku. This is when he would patch up Shoji by using his webs to create like a sort of cast for him, as we would then see Deku blitzing throughout the entirety of the forest and going on to find Momo Yaoyorozu and the boy Awase who had a welding quirk, using his incredible strength to completely one-tap the Nomu, as Deku would then fly around the actual area once more and he would find the scene of the villain Mustard, using his gas quirk to try to get the better of Tetsu and Kendo. But with Deku's arrival, he would quickly go on to take care of the villain, completely wrapping him up with tendrils as it would knock him out, disarming the gas quirk, with Deku continuing this onslaught of just All Might performance. This happening in the midst of like 30 seconds. Him then arriving to where Toga was at, currently facing off in a standstill against Uraraka and Tsuyu, as he would capture her as well in the Venom symbiote sludge. This is when finally arriving towards the direction of Moonfish, which is where Bakugo and Todoroki would be at. Or sorry, no, only Todoroki in this timeline. Deku would go on to back Todoroki, smashing Moonfish's teeth with one flick of his finger, as Todoroki would freeze the villain solid, creating a gigantic iceberg, leaving Deku to stare at Todoroki and nod. And as all this would be taking place, we would see Deku finally pause for a moment and breathe, turning over towards Todoroki with his eyes being molded into a different shape, the symbiote having its own influence as well as the one-for-all sparks, as he would stare at Todoroki, and before he knew it, he was gone. Mr. Compress having used his quirk to take him away, as he would be trying to escape from Deku, but because Deku was just so much faster in this timeline, he easily caught up to him, less than a second before Todoroki was transformed, and he would try to force him to turn him back, but Mr. Compress would hand him a marble full of nothing, as he would tell Izuku that he's willing to die for this cause, smiling under his mask, which Deku would rip off of him, with Deku staring at him and Venom telling Izuku,
"Let me persuade him."
Transforming into the grotesque version of Venom, bunny ears completely gone, as he would roar in his face, massive tongue showing that he could take him out in one gulp, with Mr. Compress instantly in that moment low-key caving and revealing that Todoroki was under his tongue. This is when he would give Todoroki to Deku, and Izuku would punch Mr. Compress on the side of the head, knocking him out, as he would turn to wonder if there's any more villains nearby, and Izuku, using the power of One For All, would pretty much go throughout the entirety of the forest scouting, realizing that nobody was left, because Dabi, Twice, and Kurigiri had warp-gated away, after the rendezvous point time had ran out, and nobody else had showed up. And with that being the case, a multitude of villains would actually be taken into custody this time, with Dabi, like I said, Twice, and Mr. Compress, but Kurigiri being the only villains that All For One will have at his disposal. I mean, of course, Shigaraki would be there too, but that's neither here nor there. Quick timeout, I actually just realized something. I not only covered the Hosu incident in which Shigaraki had involvement in, but I also went on to cover the USJ arc, or sorry, not the USJ, but the Forced of Training thing arc. And again, Shigaraki is heavily involved in that arc, and a lot of you are probably confused, like, yo, isn't Shigaraki in jail? And yes, he was on his way to jail. I completely forgot to mention this detail, but much like you would expect would happen with Shigaraki, he and Kurigiri would both be broken out of the police custody as they were on their way to the prison. So that's how Shigaraki is still able to be part of the main story, and we're not having to like jump through hoops and circles in order to like just retcon a bunch of things. Again, really sorry I didn't cover that, but to continue back into the story, after the Forest Training Camp arc was finally over and the villains were all captured, we would see all of them being taken into custody with a much larger group of heroes there, meaning that this time they wouldn't actually have access to being taken back by the villains. And ultimately, all of those villains that were taken out at the Forest Training Camp are actually going to be at Tartarus, which easily sets us up for like a Tartarus breakout arc, but that's going to be happening later. Anyways, after the students would return back to UA, they would be having I want to say a 1 week break, in which case UA has to go under scrutiny because of everything that's been taking place, and we would kind of just see Deku being at home more than often, with news of the USJ spreading like wildfire, and everybody finding out about the fact that this is not only the first time they've been attacked, but the second time they've been attacked, with UA having to kind of like enforce the whole UA dormitory system. This is where we would see two major things happen. Number one, Bakugo would end up finally making his way back into the story, and by that, I mean that Bakugo would come back involuntarily. Because after Bakugo would finally go on to join another hero school, which would likely be Shiketsu High, who accepts him due to the fact that he has an incredible quirk, and he's over there playing second fiddle to Inasa now, Bakugo would have essentially been starting to do a lot better for himself. But this is where something's gonna change. Because remember that Venom 3 movie, or the second movie, where it's discovered that Venom leaves like a little like symbiote thing behind and ends up being like his kid, he creates Carnage? That happens, and Carnage, the symbiote little thing for Carnage, is going to be outside of the door of Deku's house. So as Mitsuki would end up pretty much taking Bakugo and being like, look, damn it, you need to go over there and apologize to that kid. If you think I'm gonna keep letting you play hero while you haven't said anything to the kid you bullied all your life, you got another thing coming. So Bakugo would be like, shut up, old hag. And so making his way to the front door, this is when Bakugo would go to knock, but before he could, this like red thing would crawl up his arm. And Bakugo would sit there going, the hell? About to blast an explosion at it until it would start covering him. And this red goop, similar to what Izuku has, would start manifesting itself around him. Bakugo realizing that this is just like what Deku has. It's his quirk, right? So as the Venom symbiote or the Carnage symbiote would start covering him entirely, Bakugo would feel a strange sense of power. And Izuku and Inko would have no clue of this because on this particular day, conveniently enough, they weren't home. Meaning that Bakugo would have just gotten the power of Carnage and no one's gonna have any clue about this. And that doesn't just come with the caveat of Bakugo now being a maniacal, literal, like, you know, walking freaking nuke with the tendencies of Carnage, but it actually also means that Bakugo is going to be inheriting some of the memories from Venom. And if you think that doesn't matter, you've got a whole nother thing coming, because keep in mind, in this timeline, Deku never ends up confessing to the fact that he has a borrowed quirk. Bakugo views Deku as the reason he got expelled, and Bakugo was pissed off at the fact that he hid his quirk for him for all this time. So now, Bakugo's gonna go on to discover the truth about how Deku not only got the symbiote, but how he even got one for all. And after Bakugo discovers the fact that All Might, the symbol of beast, his hero, the person he's looked up to for so long, gave Deku that quirk because he got caught in the sludge villain incident and Deku decided to act, he's gonna be completely livid. Not only does he think that Deku does not deserve the power of One for All in any way, shape, or form, but Venom either. And this would serve to unironically lead Bakugo down the Venom symbiote path that we would get in the Spider-Man 3. You know how like Eddie was super like jealous and he was like going to straight up churches and praying on the downfall of Peter? We straight up see that type of villainous behavior come out of Bakugo. Because from the moment he discovers these realities and the tendencies of Carnage start influencing his already very, you know, rampage-like personality, Bakugo is going to become 100% a villain. Which means we would likely end up getting a Carnage arc, in which case Bakugo goes on to quite literally slaughter his parents in his own house, because that's straight up Carnage behavior, but he then goes on to go on a killing spree in which this man would go down to like different areas that are insanely populated and start tearing through people, creating sights at the beginning of his arms, and not only letting some people believe that they're gonna escape, but quite literally shooting like web types like things towards people who are running and then like placing them on the floor. So just as people would think that they were able to actually get away, he would grab at the tendrils and yank them back, biting off their heads before he would then let more people like run farther and ultimately grab them all realizing that they're dead. And just as he would be about to kill his I want to say 60th person, this is when some of the heroes would arrive to the scene, primarily Fat Gum, who upon arriving would instantly stop playing games, rushing in to try to get into a one-on-one combat with him, in which case Bakugo would go on to throw a nuclear-powered explosion, destroying half that area in the city, which pretty much just looks exactly like what you would expect from somebody like Genos, just obliterating even more people than were originally gonna die, and straight up killing Fat Gum Venom himself, leaving to yet another hero arriving on the scene in Mount Lady who would attempt to stomp him out, but tendrils would simply wrap around her leg, stopping her from moving as he would go on to blast an explosion directly at the bottom of her foot. Kind of like I don't want to paint a too gruesome of a picture, but imagine you have a point blank explosion go off under your foot, which starts caving into you like you were a freaking rock. That's what Bakugo does to her, and her foot, like, it hurts so damn much she starts to like cry out in pain. But before she even has the chance to like sit there and like dwell on how much this actually hurts, the red symbiote like stuff just starts crawling up her body, as it would then start hardening and compressing in on itself, straight up pulling a Gara sand coffin on Mount Lady, who, mind you, is freaking massive. This would explode blood everywhere, and just as this would happen, this is when the perfect hero to arrive would come. Endeavor. Using his flame quirk, he would send a blast of flames flying directly to the direction of Bakugo, forcing Bakugo to fight on the back foot the entire time, as he would try to use his explosions to keep Endeavor's flames away. But after more of Endeavor's hero agency backups would arrive, and more flame heroes would start to get involved, Bakugo would be forced to go on the retreat, and he would go on to charge up a massive explosion in both hands, just letting off a bunch of flashbang explosions all over the place as he would disappear, nobody being able to actually track of Bakugo. As he would disappear, the symbiote clothes would completely melt off of him walking into a nearby building and acting as though he was just a random bystander, coming outside and faking his look of shock as he would stare at the devastation, the scorch marks, the left behind Venom symbiote like webbing fluid that he's able to create similar to Venom, and the multiple heroes dead on the ground, him cracking a smile for just a slight second with nobody even noticing that it was him leaving the area being escorted by police since he was one of the few people to survive, as what they believe, and him eventually making his way off to, try this somewhere else, deciding to take a more low-key approach to satiate his hunger. Because remember, Carnage is one of those symbiotes that's just not going to care about, hey, is this a human? Like, let me not eat. No, he does not care about none of that. Which would ultimately leave him to go on to become like a very villainous figure by the name of Carnage. He's like on high priority for the heroes to actually capture. All Might, in fact, has even been out on patrols trying to find him because it's just like, bro, like, they need to freaking find this man. This man is a menace to society. But unfortunately for the heroes, they wouldn't be the first ones to find Carnage. In fact, it would actually be the League of Villains. And once Bakugo would discover that these villains are actually the ones responsible for the multiple attacks on UA, Bakugo would be excited, just knowing that their interests align perfectly. They want to kill All Might, and he wants to kill a successor. So after discovering the truth about Shigaraki, the League of Villains, and even All for One, he would agree to join the League of Villains on the condition that he can do whatever he wants and kill whoever he wants. And All for One would end up agreeing to that, telling him that there's only one person he's not to touch: Shigaraki, his future vessel. So after Carnage symbiote would end up melting off Bakugo's face and the true face of Bakugo would be revealed, All for One would smile, knowing that this was perfect. Now not only did he have the grandson of Nana Shimura, but even a past disciple of All Might. This is working out wonderfully, he would think. And while all this would be happening, we would finally see the students returning back to UA, in which case the dormitory system would now finally be employed, and we never would have gotten the Camino Ward incident with All Might and the heroes trying to rescue Bakugo, because mind you, he was out there on some villain timing that whole time, which means that we're able to get directly into the next arc that would come into the story, being the provisional licensing exam, in which case something very interesting would happen. Because remember, Bakugo's still technically part of Shiketsu High, so once everybody would disboard the buses, Deku would look around to scout out the competition, Venom internally telling him,
"We need not to worry. We're stronger than anyone here."
Until he would sense something nearby. Another symbiote. Venom internally telling Deku,
"There's another symbiote, and I believe it's my offspring."
Deku being like, "What? An offspring? How'd you do that?" With Venom telling him,
I belong to a race that reproduces asexually. And I don't know when, but I must have produced an offspring, and whoever's there will be the host.
So as Deku would look at the crowd coming nearby, he would spot Shiketsu uniforms, wondering how they would get a hold of that, but this is when everything would become clear. Bakugo. Deku would be shocked, and Venom would so as well. Deku asking if he believes him to be the one responsible for the things going on lately, with Venom telling him,
It's him. It's definitely him. He's putting on an act, but I can tell that symbiote has bloodlust and a whole lot of it.
With Deku looking at Venom and telling him that he's noted that. Him staring at Bakugo, who would simply feign to smile at him before walking away and having a psychotic grin appear on his face. This is when the test would begin, and Bakugo would opt to stay out of his way, simply watching Deku from the shadows, knowing that at the moment, Deku's still stronger than him. But once he gains power to overcome that, he'll make sure to kill him and rip him limb from limb, as his symbiote internally would tell him,
We shall kill him!
Bakugo smiling at just the thought of that, as he would take his part of the section, and we would just see both students ultimately end up getting their hero license. With the arc ending with an extremely uneasy tension, and Deku actually reporting it to All Might that he believes Bakugo's the one responsible for that incident with the death of hundreds of people. All Might saying that he can't just accuse a former classmate of something like that, saying that he doesn't know what he's talking about. But this is when Venom's head would stick out from him and explain everything.
That symbiote is my offspring. It's a red one. Be careful, All Might. You couldn't tell I was in Deku if I kept my secrets, and neither will you be able to tell when he keeps his.
All Might taking note of this, as he would decide that it's better to be safe than sorry. So taking a squad of police and a few heroes to Bakugo's house, this is when he would arrive, seeing that the outside looked normal as ever. The cars were parked, but once they knocked on the door, there was nothing. And this is when, looking through the window, one of the officers would puke, seeing the sight of two dismembered adults and even a dog. As the heroes would enter and take note of the fact that there's way too similarities here to be considered a coincidence. Bakugo truly was Carnage. So after All Might would hear this, he would be saddened, almost just broken, knowing that Bakugo had always had strange tendencies, but to do something like this, he'd be saddened, ultimately reporting to Deku that he was right, as Izuku, uneasy as ever inside of the student dormitory, would ask All Might what they can do about this, him explaining to Deku that at the moment, there's nothing, because Bakugo wasn't found at his house. And from what his school Shiketsu was telling him, he stopped showing up ever since he got his provisional hero license. It's been 2 days and he's been a no-show. In fact, his schedule's been erratic. There's days that he won't show up and there's times that he will. His classmates have been worried about him, but because they're not able to just pry into his normal life, they're unable to find information about him. In fact, the school has already decided that if he doesn't show up the day after, he'll be expelled, and he would be blacklisted from ever having the opportunity to become a hero anywhere else again, because now it would be 2 infractions, and hero schools would be stupid to allow a third. So after that discovery would be made by Deku, he'd be left speechless to just think about Bakugo, the kid that he knew as a child, the one he admired all that time, the person he wanted to be like. And now, he was gone. The Bakugo he knew is no longer there, and Venom would only be there to pretty much ram that point into Deku's mind, telling him that the next time that they meet, he'll have to be the one to handle him. Because with the power like an explosion quirk and the symbiote that, not to mention, should be stronger than him because that's just how the symbiotes work, not many heroes will be capable of taking him out. So with Deku hearing this and acknowledging that Venom's right, he would prepare himself mentally for what's to come. And so before you know it, another arc would pass on by, with the Overhaul arc taking place, which is going to be shifting dramatically compared to what we get in the original, what with Bakugo being involved in the League of Villains in this timeline, and them being considerably short of members. This would lead Overhaul to believing that he has the upper hand, and doing his negotiations a bit differently, which would ultimately result in Bakugo finally making his presence known from the rooftop to surround Overhaul in webbing, which he would overhaul instantly before he would then feel a scythe plunge through his chest and then throw him as he would ricochet off the roof of the building, and Shigaraki would laugh.
Man, Katsuki, you really are strong, you know that?
All the while his voice would ring out going, "Shut it, you damn crusty lip freak. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because the guy let his guard down and Carnage been craving some excitement." So as he would stare at the body of Overhaul, suddenly he would see him get back up, Bakugo being shocked as ever, realizing that he's still alive. How was he still alive, Bakugo would think. But much more than that, something else would ring in his mind. He's free to go all out, so instantly covering his body in all those tendrils, rising up to the surface by using the red sludge, Bakugo would screech out before aiming one hand to the direction of Overhaul, and Overhaul would place his hand on the ground, causing spikes to go flying at Bakugo, which Bakugo would destroy with tendrils that would be whiplashing everywhere, only for an explosion, the likes of War Arc Bakugo to be sent flying at the direction of Overhaul, completely charring everything there, with Overhaul dying instantly. Mind you, these explosions were capable of killing All For One in the original timeline, forcing him to revert to a state in which case he was a literal baby. So yeah, I 100% believe Bakugo would be capable and would kill Overhaul during the negotiations that happen in Season 4. And after Overhaul's body would have been reduced to nothing but ashes, Bakugo would let out a maniacal laughter, telling Shigaraki that his goons can clean up after him, disappearing into the night as usual and going on yet another rampage, since that last kill just wasn't enough to satiate his thirst. And so, rampaging throughout nightclubs, Bakugo would murder a multitude of different people and cover things up by simply telling himself he was simply ridding the world of scum, laughing as he would do so because the truth was he just liked a good kill. And so as all this would be taking place, Deku would once again go on to take the Night Eye Agency internship due to the fact that he would once more face off against Mirio, and after impressing him and defeating him in this timeline, Deku would work with Night Eye and Mirio, learning as much as he could from the two as he would ultimately finish off the Overhaul arc without the Overhaul inclusion, because mind you, Bakugo killed him, which is kind of a little heroic when you think about it, but also not at the same time, because it means that Eri now quite literally has no use to the Chisaki family, and it also means another thing: no more torture for Eri. So I guess he kind of saved her, but he also didn't, because keep in mind, without Overhaul's, being there, this means that the raid likely wouldn't end up happening, and she would most likely be stuck there for at least another few weeks, if not a couple more months, until they ultimately decide to take down the Yakuza family. But hey, that's neither here nor there. That said, we are now able to skip the Remedial Course arc because Bakugo and Todoroki don't end up failing. We're able to skip the UA Sports Festival arc because, who cares about Gentle? And we're able to skip even the Pro Hero arc, which is when the students would go on their internship with the Pro Hero Endeavor, which I still think would end up happening because Todoroki and Deku would have buried the hatch that they had from the UA Sports Festival, and he would end up interning there alongside, I want to add like another hero there, maybe, but I don't think anybody else would fit, so no. Just those two. This would ultimately help Venom to develop some sort of resistance to flames because he would constantly be around Todoroki and Endeavor, and would ultimately lead to the final arc of the story, the joint training camp, which is where Class 1A and Class 1B would face off against each other, which, if you guys have actually seen this in the anime, is low-key one of the worst seasons in the story, but I plan to mitigate that because right now we're about to get so much damn action that I don't even think it's worthwhile to cover the actual round Deku was a part of. The Mineta, Ashido, Uraraka Deku fight versus Shinso and his squad? Yeah, no real reason for us to cover that, because before we could even get to that fight, at around the second round, a portal would end up opening in the midst of everything happening. And remember, because All Might hasn't had to take part in many fights as he would in the original, primarily the All For One fight, this means that he wouldn't be drained of his power, and he would be at around the same strength level that he was when he faced All For One in canon. So, as multiple portals would end up opening around them and Class 1A and 1B would be left in shock, this is when a horde of Nomus would come out. Villains would step outside, some that were even recently taken out of Tartarus via Kurogiri's warp gate, as we would see Shigaraki, All For One, and Bakugo step out, not as Carnage, but as Katsuki, leaving a grin as he would ask them what kind of stupid event they're taking part of today. with Tetsu going up to him and telling him, "Hey, you're not allowed to be here. Last I heard, you're a..." As suddenly, Bakugo would transform his hand into a scythe and plunge it directly into him, who, mind you, was using his metal quirk. So Deku just cut into this guy like he was freaking butter, and the reason for that is because he was gifted an enhancement quirk courtesy of All For One, after a very special thing was bestowed upon him. They kind of traded powers, I guess you could say. And a lot of you guys get what that means, but some of you won't. So let me just spell it out for you. All For One has the Toxin symbiote, because Carnage ended up producing his own symbiote as well. After months and months of time, I see no reason why this wouldn't happen. And because I set up a whole little question of asking you guys if you guys would want something like that in part 1, I figured I couldn't disappoint. Bakugo can't be the only person that gets a Venom symbiote. And so as the body of Tetsu would drop to the ground, now completely dead, we would see the heroes all look in shock as Aizawa, staring at Bakugo in that moment, canceling his quirk, would realize that he has the same thing Deku does. So, in an instant, all chaos would erupt. Bakugo would transform into Carnage, and we would see an all-out brawl ensue between the Nomus and the students. A lot of them, and I do mean a lot of them, dying. Mainly characters like Tsuyu, Koda, Ibara, Beast Guy, Aoyama, the Mushroom Girl would die, Ida would die, freaking Tetsu obviously already died, Sato would die. The guy who could shoot glue from his head would die. The praying mantis quirk dude would die. Mineta dies. Ashido dies. Uraraka dies. Like Monoma dies. Shinso wouldn't die. I'd like to have him survive. And then like that little guy with like the glasses thing like on his face, he dies. The girl with the red outfit that kind of looks like Momo but with short hair, she dies too. So many character deaths end up happening in the span of like the next minute that it would be insane. And all the while this would be happening, we would see All Might there with the class, as he would instantly buff up, revealing to everybody that that man that's been a part of their hero training course since All Might's been trying to preserve his strength for the past few months, that he's been, at school, not really trying to make himself public, would buff up into All Might. Everybody realizing who that was, or at least the people who paid attention, who aren't, fighting for their lives, as All Might would lunge at All For One and yell out, "All For One!" This is when throwing a punch, it would be blocked by All For One, who would catch it using a multitude of quirks and the power of his newly found symbiote toxin, crushing the hand of All Might, who would recoil, crying out in pain, as All For One would tell him that his disciple isn't the only one with this power, throwing him into a nearby building, as All Might would look up and despair would clearly be on his eyes. No matter how much All Might tried, he just couldn't bring himself to smile, because everywhere he looked was a student being torn apart by a Nomu or a villain. You have Todoroki facing off against Dabi on one side of the battlefield, and Deku facing off against his former pupil Bakugo. Deku clearly beating down on him, who would have tried to swing towards him using the actual terrain and stab him with a scythe, only for Deku to blitz past him and show him the difference between a power like One For All and whatever enhancements All For One's given him, even his own quirk. Deku would move so damn fast, Bakugo wouldn't know what's hitting him, and as Bakugo would be being beaten and Venom would tell Deku how to fight against another symbiote, Deku would be destroying him, swinging, using the pipes as both would be flying into the air, shooting webbing towards one another as each of them would create weapons. Bakugo creating two scythes in each arm as he would try to cut off Deku's head, and Deku creating a hammer in one arm and like a spear thing in the other, trying to ram that into Bakugo and like land like a fatal attack and then like slam his arm into his freaking head, knocking him out or something like that. But as all of that would be taking place, All Might would be watching and Deku would be aware of what's happening in the battlefield, because Venom would be scouting things out, telling Deku that not only does he need to fight Bakugo, but he needs to protect his classmates. So every time Deku would knock Bakugo down, sending him flying, he would regenerate for a second as Deku would go over towards his classmates and destroy Nomu after Nomu after Nomu. But this is when All Might's body would be flung towards the distance, and Deku, realizing that All Might, in his weakened state, will not be able to handle the threat that is All For One, who clearly, after Venom would inform him, has a symbiote, Deku would tell Venom something he never thought he would say: "Go help him." And so, Venom asking,
"Are you sure
With Deku nodding and telling Venom to go, he would throw his arm, tossing the symbiote at the direction of Venom, or sorry, All Might, who then, being enveloped in the power of Venom and having his injuries start to be partially healed, causing him not only to regain some of his former one-for-all strength, but also enhancing him due to the fact that now he has access to Venom, which would quite literally send All Might back to his prime. He would look towards the direction of All For One and blitz towards him, gigantic muscles bulging, him looking like Venom but 2 times the size, as this All Might like symbol would be carved on its chest with the Venom symbiote alongside like some like bunny ear things that he would have on him, a lot similar to what Deku has. Him going on to face off against All For One, as each of them would clash fists in the middle of everything, both symbiotes screeching out as Toxin would promise Venom, "You'll die!" This is when we would see Venom's head come out of All Might as he would say, "We'll see," then plunging his fist directly into the stomach of All For One, as All For One would look up at All Might, and All Might's fist would then be uncovered by the Venom symbiote as he would throw a smash directly towards the face of All For One, shattering the mask that he had previously had, only to reveal that he didn't need it. The toxin symbiote had healed him to a state prior to the injury, and now both titans were going at it, clashing hard as they possibly could at the center of everything, all the while Deku was now facing off against an enraged Carnage who was trying to use everything at his disposal, explosion, sound, but it wasn't working. And he was enraged more and more, realizing that this futile attempt to kill Deku wasn't working. So, in one last desperate attempt to give the middle finger to Deku before he was taken out, he would attempt to kill some more of his classmates. But Deku just moves around the battlefield like he was the freaking Flash, using the powers of One For All, which would all manifest on this day. Due to just a need and desire for them, Deku would awaken the quirks of One For All, his body naturally sort of like adapting to the strength that he could actually use without the Venom symbiote, which would be about 50%, and him using abilities like Gear Shift and Danger Sense and Smokescreen and Fajin to mimic the ability that he would have used once he had Venom, ultimately grabbing onto the Carnage symbiote, pulling him towards him, using Gear Shift on Bakugo to slow him down, as Deku would go on to land a barrage of 150 blows on Carnage, sending him crashing throughout the entirety of the metals, as he would then fly at him using Gear Shift and Flow, spinning mid-air as he would go on to use Fajin to charge up, building up even more speed before he would then slam his foot directly into the body of Bakugo and send him crashing into a multitude of like metal pipes and stuff like that, which would ring out, causing a massive amount of noise to start echoing out and injuring Bakugo, causing the Carnage symbiote to start like splitting off from Bakugo, giving Deku just enough time to wrap it around with Black Whip and tear the symbiote off of the body of Bakugo, with Bakugo being left there beaten and battered, blood running down his face, as Deku would step in front of Bakugo and ask him why he was supposed to be the best, only for Bakugo to tell him he hates him, and Deku to destroy the Carnage symbiote, tossing it back into outer space from which it came, as he would then go on to assist his classmates with the remaining Nomus, which would be 16 in total, destroying them all as fast as possible, as All Might would be on the other side of the battlefield, blocking an attack from All For One, Quirk supercharging it with a shield that he would make with Venom, before then creating a gigantic hammer and sending it flying at the direction of All For One, who would counter this by grabbing, yanking him towards him, creating a drill in his other arm and impaling it directly into the side of All Might's stomach, this causing blood to start pouring out from the symbol, as he would grab onto All For One, engulf his symbiote with the black sludge, and slam his head down onto his knee, following that up by using the Venom symbiote, like, you know, like when you're doing the rope exercise that you have to like, you kind of have to like crouch, like get into like, you have to like bend your knees a little bit and start like moving the ropes up and down, and they start like doing the squiggly. He starts doing that with All For One, slamming him, lifting him into the air as he spins him. All For One tries to use his symbiote power to catch him off guard, but Deku would arrive, slamming his fist directly into the stomach of All For One, causing him to be dizzy dizzy and hazed long enough as Deku would apply his gear shift effect to him, and as he would slowly make his way towards All Might would charge up a United States of Smash as the voice of Venom would cry out,
Die!
This is when his All Might's fist would clash with him. All for One would be split into two, his body being completely destroyed as the clouds above would completely split, and we would see Deku watch on as All Might and Venom would have just taken down the greatest villain that has ever been known to mankind. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where I'm going to be wrapping up What If Deku Had the Venom Symbiote, the remastered version. Let me know what you guys thought about this one. I had so much damn fun doing the Venom voice, and I have a little friend who wants to say something to you guys. One last little cringy thing.
It was fun making this video. Like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. And remember, we are Venom.